Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Beth Worrell and I look after responsible AI programs for the National AI Centre. Thank you so much for joining us today on our webinar with the Human Technology Institute. We are very grateful for your time and attention, and we look forward to hearing from you as well. These sessions are designed to be interactive, so we certainly recommend that you submit your questions and comments into the chat function so that we can make time to have a discussion at the end of the presentation. Before I start today, I do want to recognise that for many of us, we're on Australian lands around the country. For myself, I'm on Kaurna country down here in South Australia. So I do want to recognise and pay my respects to Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging, and extend those respects to any Indigenous people on the call today. Before we get into the substance of the conversation today, I do want to tell you a few things about the National AI Centre. We were established a few years ago to really help to accelerate Australia's adoption of artificial intelligence, particularly focusing on organisations of all shapes and sizes, but especially small and medium-sized organisations. We run two main programs at the moment. The Responsible AI program, of which I'm a part, has programs, events, resources, guides, training and more. And we exist to help Australian organisations uplift their practices as it relates to the safe and responsible use of artificial intelligence here in Australia. I'm joined by another team of colleagues who are focused on building Australia's sovereign capability in the AI space, and they work very closely to identify, support, scale up and spotlight Australia's vast, talented network of Australian entrepreneurs in the AI space. We have a range of events and activities happening with the National AI Centre. We also run the AI Month in October of this year, so there's lots of ways that you can get engaged with us to learn not only how you can uplift your own practices, but what Australian businesses are happening here, growing in Australia around the AI space. So I look after the Responsible AI Network. We are looking to grow this community of practitioners substantially, and we would love to hear from you if you'd like to be part of this community. One of the organisations that we work very closely is, of course, the Human Technology Institute, who are the team represented here today. So we're very grateful for their participation and their contribution to this community practice. We published the Voluntary AI Safety Standard in September of last year, and I do recommend, if you haven't had a look at that resource, it's a really important resource and guide to help shape and create a framework around responsible AI practices in Australia. This is a best practice guide. It's quite extensive and comprehensive, but it really helps to provide the clarity that we know Australian organisations are looking for as it relates to what is safe and responsible use of AI. How do I help my organisation move towards this? And so the document is available for free, and we're running lots of webinars and training programs to help organisations wrap their hands around what this guide looks like. We're also going through a process at the moment to update this document, and there will be some additional materials that are released from the National AI Centre that help organisations understand how to procure AI in a safe and responsible way, and also the developers and technical people working on AI tools. This provides additional guidance to those organisations and those professionals developing AI services. So those resources will be available in the coming months. I also want to highlight that we have a range of other resources, one of which is the AI Impact Navigator. Again, if you haven't had a look at this resource, it really helps you better understand how your AI use has a broader impact in community, on customers, in society. It's another free resource that we make available, so I certainly recommend that you check out our website for more resources. I also want to highlight that many of my colleagues in the department are working on Australia's National AI Capability Plan. This is going to be a big priority and focus for the team going forward, and there is further information online. There's lots of ways in which you can get involved in this program and make your voice heard as it relates to this Australia's capability in AI. So please get in touch with us and download those resources and get involved in the process. So that's it from me at the moment. I'd like to hand over to Professor Nick Davis and Gaby Carney for today's presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Beth, and to all the team at the National Artificial Intelligence Centre. It's fantastic to be a partner with you all, and thank you all for joining. As Beth said, I'm Professor Nick Davis, and I'm one of the co-directors of the UTS Human Technology Institute. We're rather unique as a university-based institute, and really the unique bit is that we are deeply socio-technical. So under my colleague, Professor Sally Cripps, we have a dozen data scientists, machine learning experts, and top-level mathematicians who are really focused on how to use AI systems safely and responsibly to solve complex social challenges. And under my colleague, Professor Ed Santo, we have a policy team focused on, the best practice around the world and in Asia Pacific and Australia on supporting public policy and public services. And I'm really delighted to be here with my colleague and our senior fellow, Gaby Carney, as part of our team, which is laser focused on how organisations use and govern artificial intelligence in ways that, of course, are trustworthy and safe and responsible, but also lead to really great performance. And I think that's really what we're going to be focused on today is, how do you set up your organisation with the roles and skills for effective AI governance? And with that, Gaby, take us through it.
Thanks very much, Nick. So as Nick just said, we're talking today about the people, skills and culture needed for safe and responsible AI. This is something that HTI has recently published a snapshot report about. So I'll speak first about the roles and skills needed for effective AI governance. Then Nick will speak about how to build those skills, and then back to me, and I'll talk about building a workplace culture that's aligned with safe and responsible use. So if we move to the next slide. In our view, people, skills and culture is one of the main elements of AI governance that organisations need to get right. We've outlined here what HTI considers are the 8 key elements of AI governance. The first 2 focus on foundational issues. So that's the key accountabilities and the governance structures. In this report, though, we wanted to dig a little deeper into the people, skills and culture needed to use AI safely and responsibly within an organisation. We felt that this was an area that organisations needed more guidance in. And when we started researching the area, we actually found that there really isn't a lot of formal research or guidance on it. So the report that we published and what we'll be talking about today has been developed partly through a series of AI governance workshops that we held in the second half of last year. We spoke to over 200 people as part of those workshops, mostly senior executives in the private and public sectors and company directors. And we found them actually really useful in hearing what are the issues out there in the market in terms of AI governance, how organisations are dealing with them, and also for testing some of our ideas as well. So if we move to the next slide, HDI has identified the main roles and skills that we believe are needed for best practice AI governance. And I'll just go through each one of these quickly. So firstly, you've got the board. It needs to have the skills and experience and expertise to oversee AI strategy and risk and also monitor performance. The directors don't need to be AI experts, but they do need to have enough of an understanding to be able to identify the risks and opportunities in AI adoption. And if they don't have those skills, they can seek board training on AI, they can recruit new members who have expertise in AI, or they can establish an external advisory committee. Next, you have a lead AI executive, and this is often known as a chief AI officer. So people will have seen a lot of these roles advertised recently in the market. We've seen a rise in chief AI officers whether they're named that or not. We've seen them in both the public and private sector. In HTI's view, this is actually a governance role rather than a technical one, and the role really should be part of the senior leadership team or very close to it. So we think that this role is really about ensuring that the organisation's strategic objectives for AI are translated into practice. So this is the person who oversees the use of AI across the organisation and coordinates it where necessary, ensures the AI governance is effective, and that staff are trained to build AI literacy across the organisation. In our view, they don't need to be an expert in AI tech. They would need to have an understanding of it, but as I said, it's more of a governance role. Then you have the AI governance capability, which reflects a range of governance skills, and I'll get to that in a few minutes. The fourth is people and culture. So we didn't initially think of people and culture as one of the main roles and skills for best practice AI governance, but increasingly we came to realise that the people and culture team is really a significant enabler of responsible AI. And that's because so many of their functions need to be considered with AI use. So for example, recruitment for AI-related roles, developing policies and procedures, learning and development, workforce strategy, and even change management where it will impact on the workforce. And then finally, you have stakeholders, and that involves the staff and other stakeholders who are actually engaged in the adoption of AI. Nick will be talking more about that in a few minutes. So if we move to the next slide, here you'll see the roles needed for effective AI governance will cascade down through the organisation. So you start with the board, which oversees strategy and risk and sets the tone with the AI values, move to the senior leadership team and the lead AI executive, through to the governance capability and down to the staff and business units who are using AI as part of their jobs. So next, if we move to the AI governance capability. In practice, this could be a standalone AI governance team, or it could be part of the mainstream governance framework. There are actually arguments for either model, and we've seen both in practice. However, generally, where AI is being intentionally integrated across the business to improve processes, we've tended to see a dedicated AI governance framework being established. That could be done permanently, or it can be done as a transition phase until the organisation and the governance advisors have actually developed their AI maturity to the point where you can then mainstream this process in terms of AI adoption. So in terms of the main roles and skills for AI, for the AI governance capability, we've outlined them here, and I'll just highlight a few. So in terms of the procurement staff, they need to understand the potential risks involved in AI tools and systems and how to navigate the governance processes in relation to them. One of the things that we've heard is that for some organisations, the first time that they become aware that they're using AI is when it's identified through the procurement process. And that's where, for example, AI is embedded into a product that they're obtaining. And what we've heard is that the procurement staff then need to work with the business unit who wants to use the AI and the other governance advisors to work through those governance issues, and they may need to do that very quickly. So procurement staff are an important part of the governance capability. You then have the legal advisors who need to ensure that contracts require suppliers to notify the organisation if AI is used in products, and also advise of the laws that apply to AI. I think the time when people thought that AI was an unregulated space is gone now, and most people realise that there's actually a whole range of existing laws that do apply and that organisations will need to comply with. For example, in relation to privacy law, consumer and competition law, anti-discrimination legislation, and the list goes on. You also have the risk and compliance advisors. The IT and data team will be important for a number of reasons. They need to understand how an AI application integrates with existing IT architecture. They also need to advise how to optimise data governance. And data governance is becoming a really important issue across all organisations that are seeking to adopt AI. I think people have always known that data governance was important in the past, but because a model really needs to its effectiveness will depend on the quality of data that you put into it. It's becoming even more imperative for organisations. And they can also advise on the monitoring and reporting frameworks. Then you have the stakeholder representatives, and Nick, as I said, will be talking about them in a minute. And then finally, the people and culture staff for the reasons I mentioned before. And so now I'll hand over to Nick.
Thank you, Gabby. And I just want to underline a couple of key points that Gabby mentioned that I think are really critical for those of you who are working with AI systems or thinking about procuring them. And I guess the first one is that point that Gabby started with, which is that governance is about performance as well as compliance and risk management. And that's really underscored by that first point that you made, Gabby, where it's the board's responsibility to focus on both strategy and risks and, you know, compliance, right? So if you think about the ultimate folks who are responsible, whether you're in a statutory organisation, a government department, a not-for-profit, or a corporation, a commercial organisation, the people who are ultimately responsible have to be up on what it means both to drive performance using AI systems and digital transformation as a core enabling factor of AI, but as well those compliance and risk issues, because failing that, you can be, of course, as Gabby mentioned, undertaking actions that are unlawful or get you on the wrong side of a regulator, but also you can just be essentially losing money and not doing your duty by your stakeholders and the people that are relying on you to create value in the form of services or other aspects. And the second takeaway that I just wanted to kind of focus on before we get into the practical aspects of learning and skills that Gabby pointed out is there's a huge amount of interdisciplinary and cross-organisational engagement and communications that were on those slides that Gabby just presented. And that's because what we're talking about here with AI isn't something that just sits in your data and analytics team or in your IT team. It is an organisation-wide capability, as much as cloud has become, but probably even more so as these systems become part of our daily work life. So with that, why don't I just quickly run through how we build the skills for both effective AI governance, but frankly, the skills required for effective AI performance really is what we're talking about here. And they fall into these three categories. And traditional training sounds a bit boring, but it's essentially where you and your organisation, you make a decision about what the information and the set of abilities that you believe are most important for the sector you're in, the types of tasks that your staff are doing. So it's that curation and provision of resources of what we at HTI call a minimum viable understanding. So enough understanding of the context and the tools themselves to be able to discharge those duties, which means on the right, the fundamentals of AI. It means really underlining data governance and security and some of those risks which are amplified by AI systems, particularly AI systems which your staff will be using and your colleagues and you might be using, which are not on corporate systems and not through your company laptop or phone, right? When you're using AI kind of off platform as shadow AI, shadow IT, being able to help staff make good decisions in terms of what policies and governance is absolutely critical. And then the second category, continuous learning, it's not just about saying that's an ongoing, repeatable, we need to do cybersecurity every 3 months, etc. It's actually much more about eliciting insights from staff as a matter of course every day. So it's about that applied learning being shared. And we'll talk, as Gabby's foreshadowed a couple of times, a bit about one aspect of that we've done recently through some research. But it's really this idea of accepting that there's no way that that any organisation can teach AI top down. It has to be a kind of ongoing experience of sharing and understanding, exploration and finding solutions from your frontline staff and from your colleagues. And so normalising talking about both the opportunities and the concerns and risks is absolutely critical in that that second category. And then on the third layer there, in terms of continuous improvement, what we're talking there is actually about elevating knowledge and skills into organisational learning. So it's about saying that this becomes part of the way that your organisation does its AI governance, does its learning over time, to stay at the frontier and understand as opportunities and risks emerge, how it can rapidly adapt and respond. So for those of you who are kind of organizational behavior geeks like me, you'll remember things like Peter Sengi's The Learning Organization and these kind of concepts. It's all really about saying top-down training is interesting, peer level sharing is all very good, but how do you actually embed that into your organization over time so that when key people leave or when the context changes, it's not, you know, one or two people scrambling to make sense of it. It's everyone realizing that the governance functions in the organization are able to absorb and respond to that with relatively little amounts of panic or lag. And key to all of this is the idea that ultimately those of us who are directly exposed to AI as part of how we deliver value for government, for your non-profit organisation or for a business, we as workers are the experts on AI adoption. And so those of your frontline staff and your colleagues, they're the people that are experiencing most directly how to get the most out of these technologies, but also where some of the risks and red lines lie. But understanding that and actually using those insights requires really thoughtful, structured engagement. And this is one thing which we found during the work that we've done, that Gaby's led and that my colleague Llewellyn Spink has worked on a lot as well, is that very few organisations have structured means of working with and talking to workers about anything, but particularly about artificial intelligence. It is viewed as a little bit more of the techie IT area or a bit more of the executive-led kind of cool corporate investment angle, rather than something that's genuinely supposed to be and can be characterised as a bottom-up benefit. So our research showed that workers do feel, unfortunately, like invisible bystanders. But the research also was incredibly hopeful, because when we talked to nurses, we talked to public servants across Australia, federal public servants, and we worked with frontline retail workers. Those workers who had an incredibly low understanding and exposure to AI at the beginning had very low trust levels that it would be deployed in their interests. After a relatively short 10-day period of engagement, we've uncovered and discovered and worked with them that they had really thoughtful, nuanced and valuable insights about how AI and automation is being used, about what the ethical and legal issues are, and the aspects that would improve their lives and the lives of the customers and the stakeholders that they work for. So this idea that that we can work with people to expose and share these insights, it's not just a nice to have kind of idea. We've shown certainly in our work that when it comes to AI, it's an incredibly valuable investment. Actually having a structured means of engaging with workers builds back to that slide that I just mentioned about how to elicit learning, but it also does something that Gaby will talk about in a minute, which it does create a more supportive culture for how a whole organisation comes to deal with these issues. So how can you engage better with your employees on AI? Well, certainly we feel that at the moment, organisations that are thinking about engaging with folks, they do tend to stay at a relatively high executive level, and they bias towards more technical teams or maybe risks and compliance. And as Gaby pointed out earlier, it really needs to be a lot more broad-based than that. And it doesn't need to include your HR, your learning and development functions as well, and frontline workers in particular. The second kind of point there on deliberative is it really needs to create a structure for people to be able to share and be thoughtful over time. So not just a single survey that's done in 5 minutes to get it done because you have to do it for your boss. Actually, giving people the time and space to be able to think and reflect on these issues is incredibly valuable. And then finally, you can't build trust unless you actually show the way that those views actually get fed up and influence decision making in the organisation. So being able to put your hand on your heart and say, we listen to people, but we also present that to key decision makers in a way that's acknowledged and valued. That's really important, lest workers and other stakeholders feel that they're just being kind of tokenistically engaged with these issues. And the same structure that we've done here for workers, or a similar kind of reflective and deliberative approach, can be taken with other stakeholders as well, and frankly should be. And for that, you do have the fantastic report by the National AI Centre on the Impact Navigator that Beth mentioned earlier as well, which does point to some of these elements of the value of really, in a structured way, looking at the impact of AI systems on stakeholders. So as we kind of come towards the last section then, Gabby, tell us how we can think about this as a cultural asset inside organisations.
Thanks, Nick. So how to embed a culture of safe and responsible AI? If we move to the next slide, this was an issue that came up a lot in the workshops that we held last year. And the general consensus was, if we just move to the next slide, yeah. The general consensus was that formal governance frameworks will not be enough to ensure that AI is used responsibly. There's a number of reasons for that. One of them is that it's basically the broad range of ways in which AI can be used across an organisation can then make it quite difficult to have the transparency in terms of its use, and then to be able to manage its use in a really structured way through just formal governance frameworks. There's also the prevalence of shadow AI use, where management may not even be aware that its staff are using AI. And an obvious example of that is where you have staff using ChatGPT. They may not be aware of the risks of it. There may not be a policy about how it can be used and what the guardrails will be within the organisation. And so what we came to realise was that the key is really to create an environment where all staff are genuinely committed to the safe and responsible use of AI, and where they all see it as a shared responsibility. So we've outlined here, you can have the principles and rules about the responsible use of AI, which is the laws, the government policies, the guidance. You can have the corporate governance in place, which we've talked about already. But really what you need to operationalise all of that and make sure that your staff really are understanding the importance of responsible AI, and that they're committed to it, and that they will actually nudge each other where they see somebody's not using AI responsibly. That really relies on having the culture in place. So if we move to the next slide, we've given some tips basically on how you can build a culture aligned with safe and responsible AI. Ideally, all of these components would be in place within an organisation, and a lot of them are really common sense. But it's just worth bringing them together, articulating them, because we think it's an area which is often overlooked. If you have a look at the literature out there about AI governance, there is some discussion about culture, but we'd really just like to highlight it as a practical way that organisations could be just really living that commitment to safe and responsible use. So firstly, we're suggesting you need visible leadership from the board and management through their behaviour and communications, really demonstrating their commitment to responsible AI. Then management needs to embed the key AI values into strategies, policies and processes, and make staff aware of them. The organisation should build the AI literacy and skills of staff and provide training on AI tech, as well as policies for risk management. So staff actually have the training to be able to use AI responsibly, and then they also understand the policies in terms of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. You also need to keep staff updated on plans to use AI in order to build trust. And that goes back to what Nick was saying about the importance of really engaging your workforce. If, for example, there are plans to adopt AI that could have an impact on the workforce, we're suggesting that in order to build that culture, you really do need to build trust by having transparency with the workforce, and also implement a continuous process for staff to give feedback on how AI systems are operating and to make suggestions on how things can be improved. They're the closest basically to the wheel in terms of how AI is being deployed within the organisation, and they often will have the best ideas about things that can be improved. There should also be ongoing monitoring and reporting on the cultural changes to make sure that they're taking hold, and, for example, incentives to reinforce the desired behaviours and responses to policy breaches. If people see that people are breaching a policy about acceptable AI use and there's no response, then that can really undermine culture. And finally, management should be committing to continuous improvement, and that's something that they should be doing anyway, and that's by reviewing progress and iterating to ensure the ongoing impact develops as the technology develops. So what the organisation is doing today may be very different to 12 months' time, given the way in which AI technology is developing. And so the organisation's response should continue to develop. They're essentially the 6 key elements, we think, for building a culture of safe and responsible AI. We think that a lot of this just builds on organisational cultural principles anyway. A lot of it's really common sense, but it's worth bringing it together so that organisations can start planning out how to do this. So next, if we move to the next slide, this is actually just an outline of HTI's AI governance resources. So we've been working in this space for almost 3 years now, I think, and we've actually developed quite a lot of resources which are, by design, really focused on practical assistance to organisations. So you'll see here that we have guidance for company directors. We've also got the 8 elements snapshot where we talk about the 8 elements of AI governance, which actually align quite well with the voluntary AI safety standard. And we have a number of other resources available, including the snapshot report on people skills and culture for AI governance. So I understand that this presentation will be circulated to everybody afterwards. And if you go to our website, you will be able to access any of these resources. I'll now hand over to Beth.
Thank you very much, Gabby. That's excellent. I have really enjoyed reading a lot of the publications that you have shared there on screen. I was particularly interested in reading your Invisible Bystanders report, actually, and it's such a good reminder that AI isn't a technology that is exciting in and of itself. It needs to be a technology that actually solves a problem, and it's the people who are the closest to the problem or the cold face of a business delivering its products and services that can often come up with the best ideas. There were some really good questions in the chat, and I would recommend that people, if you have questions, please share them so that we can get to those. But Nikki and Gary asked a question about the size of the organisation that this advice is based on. It would be suggested, I think, that this advice is probably a bit more relevant to larger and maybe some medium-sized organisations. Could you reflect on that? And we would love you to perhaps talk a little bit about what you're doing with SAM, because that's going to be very much more relevant to smaller businesses.
Sure. So I might start with SAM and then provide the response. So HTI is working as part of a consortium of organisations on a project called the SAM project, which is essentially to support SMEs in Australia to adopt AI safely and responsibly. SMEs are an overwhelmingly significant proportion of businesses in Australia, and obviously they are often time poor and resource constrained when it comes to working through the governance issues in relation to AI. So what we're doing is developing an assurance process that will be hopefully, well, by design, simple and easy to use for the SMEs so that they can work through governance issues, and there'll be a lot of resources for them available to work through those issues and more generally. So my answer would be that we prepared the paper based on organisations generally. So these are the governance principles that we would recommend in terms of people skills and culture. But what we recognise is that with SMEs, some of these can be very small and very resource constrained. And so whilst the principles will hold, you may have some people holding several hats. So for example, where we talk about the lead AI executive, that may be the business owner. Where we talk about having the governance team, that may be a small number of people who wear a number of hats. But essentially what we're saying is that these are the areas of governance that you need to be thinking about. So in a small organisation, you'll still need to think about, say, procurement, you'll need to think about the IT issues, you'll need to think about the legal issues, and then perhaps iterate about who holds those, who wears those hats. We will be providing more resources about that as part of the SAM project. So we'll be translating these principles essentially into something that's much more by design sort of set up for the SMEs.
Yeah, that sounds great. And you coming from a family of small business owners, they don't just wear one or two hats, they wear 12 often, and your sole traders do all of it. So it's important to think about how we can scale up and scale down some of this advice. Absolutely. This is a good question, and this is something that I think the National AI Centre hears often, is which organisations are doing a good job in this area. I was particularly struck by, there was a law firm that we had heard from recently that had an innovation day for their employees, where everyone had an opportunity to experiment and come up with ideas in which to use AI in a safe and responsible way to help save time. And it was a great way of encouraging people to experiment in a safe way, in an endorsed way, and it was a catalyst for innovation. But I wondered if you had heard very many other examples that you could share.
I'm happy to jump in here if I can, Beth, and maybe just to say, we've published a few case studies on this. They do tend to be the larger organisations at the moment that we've been working with, just because of that capacity issue and the kind of the incentive to be public first movers in the space that Nikki and Gary have referred to in their questions. And so we've profiled UTS, we've profiled Telstra, profiled KPMG Australia, and we've got a few others underway. But I guess I'd probably say that it's more that modelling best practice is, first of all, thinking about the strategy that you have, like across the organisation. First and foremost, it's the first and most important thing about this, because if you're thinking strategically about how you make difficult decisions at a time of uncertainty with resource constraints, and you say, how do we actually want to create value with these systems? The next question is, how do you make sure that value is really sustainable and kind of, returns the expectations and builds trust and actually puts your business, your organisation in a better way? That's when you get to this point around leading practice of thinking about, okay, do we really know what we're doing where? And then how are we thinking through, as Gabby's presentation laid out, how are we making sure that we can make the most of this with skills and training? And so I think one of the best practices right now is, once you've got that strategic outlook, is just sharing, like literally just peer level sharing of how are people actually using it? Where is it annoying? Where is it good? Where is it giving terrible answers? Where is it a concern for privacy or security? And then formalizing some of that into the ways of working. That's where I think for businesses, whether you're 2 people or 2,000 people, that's probably leading practice right now, and making sure that you start to then capture and share some of that so that it doesn't just stay in one small team, goes across the organisation.
Yeah, we we work closely with the Committee for Economic Development in Australia, CEDA, and they've just launched a community of practice which does aim to bring people, peers together to share that information in a slightly more closed environment so that that sharing can be more easily done. I'll also do a shameless plug for a case study series that we have coming up, one of which is a non-profit, and they're how they are thinking about AI governance in the context of a non-profit. And often those are smaller organisations with fewer resources and fewer people. So it's a really fascinating example of how people are thinking about these challenges in perhaps a more constrained environment. Selfishly, I wanted to ask a question of my own, if I may. One of the things that we uncovered as part of our research with the Governance Institute talked to or revealed two really interesting points, I think. A fear that people have genuinely in the community that AI is going to impact their jobs and livelihoods, which I think is quite a genuine and understandable concern. And that on the flip side, that the more people used AI, the more confident and positive they felt about the use of AI to enhance their jobs and their skills in the future. I wondered if there is a sense that people are too scared to talk about their use of AI internally within the organisation because of that fear factor that employees, they don't want to make people scared about what that might mean for their jobs or for their operations. Is that something that you've observed, or what other barriers hold organisations back from sharing some of these topics with their employees?
I think that there may be a number of things happening at the moment. So I think that one of the things we've heard in terms of AI governance is that organisations themselves, some organisations are feeling like a bit overwhelmed about the notion of AI governance, and that may be sort of hindering them from starting down the process. And our answer to that is it's really just normal governance, but really thinking about a number of points as you go along the process. So they shouldn't feel that this is an overly complex area. In terms of use within organisations, I think it's an interesting question, because I think that there may be, I think the shadow use of AI is interesting, and the motivations for that. I think there may be employees who are using AI, for example, ChatGPT, as part of their everyday work without realising that there are any risks involved. And if the organisation hasn't called that out as an area in which they think you need rules, they may be genuinely unclear that there are risks involved. I think then there may also be a cohort who are thinking, I don't want to tell management that I'm using AI because they may see that I'm no longer required. That is at least hypothetically possible. But I wonder whether a larger proportion of staff actually just are not aware of the risks involved. And it's as simple as saying to them, well, I mean, ChatGPT can be fantastic in so many ways, and it can help you with your job in so many ways, but you really need to think about the information that you're putting into it if it's an open system, because of rules about confidentiality and privacy.
And maybe, Beth, that goes to Bella's question in the chat around how do you ensure data confidentiality? Right. And part of the answer is normalizing that use in a really positive way. So to say, look, if you can do, we're so many people are stressed right today. So many people feel like every day at the office there's endless Teams and Zoom meetings and to-do lists that just keep expanding, and keeping up with emails is hard. If there are better ways to do that, organizations tend not to immediately start firing people, because the work actually just gets done. Customers are happier, and normally in an economy, it's not a zero-sum game of work. It's actually an expanding pie. That's how productivity ends up creating more jobs at the economic level. The challenge is you do have to have the systems and structures that support that systematically. So it is good for organizations to do that. And again, a point of leading organizations, they have created what kind of Bella is referring to, which is a safe, confidential internal platform use of a generative AI or other AI models. Just remembering that not all AI is ChatGPT, but it is what we're talking about. Often when we talk about AI, we talk about large language models. But so it's actually very easy for an organisation to create a private space that's no more public than your cloud, than your SharePoint or your cloud, your Dropbox kind of style shared services. So it is possible to do and keep that confidential, and being able to do that and then help people train and use it internally is one way to model that it's totally okay to use it. The trick that I've seen for leading organizations is to take the feedback seriously. So don't just give people a tool and then expect them that the tool's perfect. If they come back and say, actually, I don't like using that tool because of these things, actually take that as an invitation to find an alternative rather than just to say, oh, well, it must be your fault. Just add more training or add more. No, like we got to really try and meet workers where they're at to give them the tools they need, and people will need different tools.
Yeah, I think we were at an event yesterday with Standards Australia, and it was really obvious that AI, even though it's the cool new kid on the block, been around for a long time, of course, but that's not going to be the silver bullet for every problem either. So it's worth being really smart about where AI is going to make a difference, because it's not always the right tool to use. I also think that organisations don't necessarily need to start with the most risky and customer-facing AI solutions as the starting place to build capacity. There's lots of AI tools and systems that can be used internally to build up some capacity and knowledge and confidence before you're unleashing other types of tools to a broader community. I also want to kind of pick up on the jobs piece, and we see lots of research coming out from places like the World Economic Forum and global research that hints at unlocking AI, unlocking an enormous new range of new jobs and actually helping people to become more efficient in existing jobs and then move on to more substantive work, more enjoyable work. Nick, I know you've just been over in France for a series of AI safety events, and that would have been around the time of Davos as well. I just wondered if you had any reflections from your trips over in Europe, and how are you feeling about the opportunity we have now in Australia?
Yeah, I'm seeing that it is actually a really big opportunity if we can grasp it with this idea of good governance, as opposed to it being just a free for all at the moment. That's partly because of the issues that are raised by people in the chat around terms of, data use and giving away value, etc. We do really need to be careful about that. As a complete aside, like when I because of where I sit as a UTS employee, I don't use some things over the open web. So I don't use DeepSeek over the open web, for instance, because I'm concerned about where that data goes. Same for this is a personal view. Same for TikTok, for other things, right?
Yeah.
But there's a difference when it comes to AI applications, and that is because a lot of these are open source. I can literally download a distilled version of the DeepSeek code and run it on my MacBook, completely disconnected from the internet, and it doesn't go anywhere. It gives me the benefit on a flight or just here at home to experience what that looks like and to get that upside. So there are lots of options here about the level of control you want to have. That doesn't mean that we're in a world yet where you absolutely have to accede to terms and conditions of third parties. You can, within your favorite cloud provider, you can have a model running that is on the terms with that cloud provider, not within any particular AI developer or user. So just keep that in mind in terms of feeling empowered about the choices we make as organizations. But what that does mean as well is that we really need to then take that empowerment into the worker level and actually use it to create more time for ourselves. And if you look back at the last 20 years of Australian economic development, the average worker has gained about 3 hours a week of time spent that is actually more with customers less doing routine, repetitive administrative tasks, and has resulted in higher wages and higher job satisfaction. And that's just because of the rollover of digital tech. Now, over that same period of time, there have been some cohorts that have suffered. Men over the age of 45 really suffered in the early to mid 2000s because there was a shutdown of a lot of manufacturing around Australia, and that put a lot of people out of the job market and then into early retirement. So we do see cohort effects whenever there's a new technology or a change in industry. But I know one thing for sure: if you are not leaning into that skills and culture piece that Gaby presented, you're much more likely to be on the receiving end of that disruption as opposed to riding and shaping the wave. And that also includes being able to influence policy and having discussions with the people, the organisations and the decision makers in this space. So I think, having been in Europe and been in Geneva with the World Economic Forum in the last couple of weeks, those headlines about, both job loss and job creation, they're both true to different extents, but it's not entirely out of our control. And the more we can feel like we're investing in the right direction, I think the more hopeful I am and the better off we'll be.
Do you, one of the things that comes up all the time is this move from kind of one and done in terms of doing your university or TAFE education, just being done with learning. What are your thoughts around how we might think about moving towards more of a culture of lifelong learning as well? And have you seen organisations really lean into that culture of learning and development? Because I'd imagine that's very inherent with making AI successful as well.
Gaby, do you want to comment on this? Because this comes up a lot in that corporate context of how you think about continuous learning.
Yeah, and I think with AI, the reality is that the tech is changing so quickly that you can't just learn about AI today and then think that in 12 months' time that you'll have an understanding of how to use it. And so This is an area where, as Nick said, you have the formal governance frameworks, you can have formal training, you could have those sort of semi-regularly, but actually there is the continuous learning process, and that is very much led by the technology, I think. And so I think what we've seen organisations do is to have annual training requirements for their staff where they say, these are the components you need to do in terms of AI, both in terms of the governance as well as the technology. That's a fairly common model that we've seen, but obviously every organisation will take its own approach. It would be, I think, a very sort of brave organisation that chose to roll out training once and then decided that that was enough.
Yeah. I must admit that comment that you often make, Nick, hearing around the minimum viable understanding of AI is a comment that I often use. Do you have any recommendations for people? Where would they start if they're really feeling at the start of this journey? It's understandable that it can be quite overwhelming, especially when it's moving so quickly.
Yeah, I think, one thing is this is going to sound like a shameless plug, but it isn't. But to start with the National AI Centre's resources on this, because, we did with you, I think it was 2 years ago now, Beth, we did a series of videos on thinking about AI and understanding what we're talking about. All that, as fast as things change, as Gaby mentioned, the fundamentals of, what are we talking about when we talk about kind of machine learning and AI, and how do we think about things like bias? So that got brought up by Abdullah Munawar in the chat. Bias is one type of failure. So it's one type of performance failure, and you need to, and it's a particularly pernicious one. It's one that can lead to legal issues with discrimination. So you've got to be really careful with it. But it's one of many failure modes, and you can think about then, well, how do we think about what causes those things to fail in our business, and what would be the impact? How would stakeholders be impacted? There are lots of resources on all of that. I think it starts with really that question of minimum viable understanding.
Yeah.
What is the bit on your journey that you think you need to understand, and really focus on your journey? So if you think, I want to use this to help with customer queries about my small business as a sole trader, going down that route and understanding enough about the data privacy issues, what could go wrong, seeking for help from others who have already done it, reaching out to the NAIC and others for support, or engaging with SAM, which is SAAM, which is what Gaby's leading as part of the AI Adopt Centres. There's lots of resources right now for people that want to lean in early, but it's your journey. It's not a top-down, one-size-fits-all. It's really how we experiment on the frontier right now.
Yeah, well, look, that is so helpful. I think as much as we can focus also on the risks and challenges associated with some of these technologies, it's also well worth considering how absolutely magical they can be as well. And as a parent of young kids, you know, it's actually amazing to be able to show them how some of these tools work. And it does remind you to actually just think, there's so much potential here as well, and it's a very exciting time to be working in this space. Gaby and Nick, thank you so much for your time today. We're very grateful for your expertise and for your input here. The report that you've shared and highlighted today is just one of many of the reports that the HTI produce in the year, and you could definitely benefit from being part of that community and downloading and reading all of those resources. I do also want to highlight again, you know, the National AI Centre have a heap of resources. We have a number of events coming up as well, where we have a celebration on the 12th of March for International Women's Day, and that event is going to be fantastic. We're spotlighting a number of women who have established AI businesses here in Australia, or are working to support other women and entrepreneurs in the AI space. So that's going to be a fantastic event. If you were in Melbourne, we are working again with Standards Australia to run a free workshop to help unpack the AI Management System Standard and the Voluntary AI Safety Standard for Australian organisations. We're hoping to bring that event to Perth as well in May. So we have a series of events, activities, resources, and the best way you can keep on top of all of these resources is to subscribe to our social media channels, follow us on LinkedIn, and make sure that you're part of our mailing list so that we can continue to share these resources with you. We're very, very keen to hear from you if there are additional resources, events, activities that you would like to see the National AI Centre focus on. Please do let us know, so it helps to shape our schedule going forward. But for the event today, that's a wrap. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and we look forward to having you join us again soon. Thank you.